Good morning. Presenting Mrs. X, a 33-year-old lady who came with the complaints of loss of weight, about 10 kilograms in the last 2 months, and loss of appetite, with the complaints of fatigue for the last 1 month, and one episode of spontaneous bleeding from the gums, and reddish skin rash 1 week back, which got resolved spontaneously, and also history of increased bleeding during the previous menstrual cycle 1 week back. There was no history of fever, joint pain or oral ulcers. She also had history of hair loss. She didn't have history of any dyspnea, chest pain or any other cardiac symptoms, no cough or hemoptysis, no abdominal pain, distension, hematemesis, melena or altered bowel movements, no headache, syncope or seizures. Past history, she had no known comorbidities, no endocrine or thyroid disorders. Family history, she had no significant family history. Personal history, she consumed non-vegetarian diet, she had normal bowel, bladder and sleep habits, no addictions. On examination, she was thin built, conscious and oriented. She was hemodynamically stable, pulse rate of 102 per minute, blood pressure of 100/60, respiratory rate of 18 per minute, and she was afebrile. Pallor was present, no icterus, clubbing, cyanosis or generalized lymphadenopathy or pedal edema. She also had oral candidiasis on the angles of mouth. She also had generalized skin pigmentation. Systemic examination was unremarkable. She didn't have any palpable liver or spleen, no cardiac murmurs, no additional sounds in the lungs, no focal neurological deficits. So the patient presented with a clinical syndrome of fatigue, loss of weight and appetite, bleeding manifestation and alopecia with oral candidiasis. So the differentials considered were immune thrombocytopenic purpura, hematological neoplasms, autoimmune rheumatological diseases like SLE, Addison's disease, autoimmune polyglandular syndrome, TB, sarcoid, hypothyroidism and chronic liver disease. Her preliminary investigations showed bicytopenia with hemoglobin of 9.9 and platelet count of 9,000 with a smear count of 15,000. Smear also showed microcytosis and ovalocytes with dimorphic picture. RFT was within normal limits. Liver functions showed mildly elevated bilirubin of 1.6 and direct of 0.50. Other investigations, her retic count was, corrected count was 2.1, LDH of 403, Coombs test was 1+ positive, vitamin D, folate and transferrin saturation were normal, coagulation profile was within normal limits, TSH was 4.1. So we proceeded with bone marrow, which showed adequate trilineage hematopoiesis with no abnormal cells. There were no features of malignancy or any infection, TB and fungus. But the patient had low stainable iron in the bone marrow smear. Chest X-ray and ultrasound did not show any abnormality. So the patient was diagnosed to have ITP, and the probable secondary cause of ITP are autoimmune diseases like SLE, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, lymphoproliferative disorders like leukemia, and infections like HIV, HCV and H. pylori. This patient also had another problem. She had persistent dyselectrolytemia. Her potassium was constantly low and she required multiple corrections. She also had low bicarb of 10, corrected calcium of 7.6, phosphate of 1.8, magnesium was 2.9. Her ABG showed metabolic acidosis, normal anion gap metabolic acidosis with a pH of 7.33. She also had hyperchloremia of 123. So this patient had hypokalemia with metabolic acidosis. So the differentials for hypokalemia with acidosis, metabolic acidosis, are fairly less, and with normal anion gap, possible differentials were renal tubular acidosis and or any diarrheal illness or any surgical diversion procedures. With high anion gap metabolic acidosis, the differentials are diabetic ketoacidosis and other poison injections like toluene. So in this patient, she had a urine pH of 7. Urine spot potassium was increased, it was 20. She had persistent hypokalemia, acidosis, and her bicarbonate level was low in the blood. So she had features of type 1 distal RTA, but there were some atypical features also. Her 24-hour quantification studies showed calcium and phosphate to be within normal limits. Protein was mildly elevated. Autoimmune workup was carried out. Her ANA was 2+ speckled, dsDNA was 54, anti-SSA was 211, and U1-RNP was 1. So with distal RTA and anti-SSA positive, anti-SSA high value, she was diagnosed to have Sjogren's syndrome. But her SLIC criteria also came as 4/11. Score came as 4. So she probably has, the final diagnosis was secondary ITP with distal type 1 renal tubular acidosis and Sjogren's syndrome with overlap of SLE. We treated her with her electrolytes was corrected and she was given immunosuppression. Initially, she was pulsed with methylpred and was started on maintenance steroids, and following which she did well. Her electrolytes were normalized, and she got discharged. And she got discharged recently and has to follow up. So I want to briefly talk about a few pathophysiological points about renal tubular acidosis. So generally in our body, acids are produced by various metabolic processes. This can be classified into carbonic acid and non-carbonic acid. So the carbonic acid produced is usually compensated by respiration, by exhalation of CO2, but the other acids had to be buffered in our body. So one thing is we have intracellular and extracellular buffers within our body. Intracellular buffers mainly are the proteins inside the cell, and extracellular buffers are the various buffers which are present in the blood. But in spite of that, the main buffering mechanism is with the renal system, and urine can concentrate hydrogen up to 1,000 times than the blood. So according to physiology, the limiting pH in the urine is 4.5 to transfer hydrogen from the blood to the tubules. That is, the normal pH is around 7.3 and urine pH is about 4.5. That is, it can concentrate up to 1,000 times the hydrogen ions. But if the urine doesn't have buffers, this 4.5 is reached very easily, and so buffers actually keep the hydrogen ions in place, at the same time not change the pH. So mainly three buffers are there in our renal system. Three main buffers are bicarbonate, which is predominantly in the proximal tubule, and phosphate, which is predominantly in the distal, and then ammonia. In the proximal RTA, mainly the defect occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule cell. The initiating event is the sodium potassium ATPase. So this causes 3 sodium to get into the blood and 2 potassium into the proximal tubule cell, which causes a negative gradient in the cell, negative gradient for sodium, and this causes sodium to enter in exchange for hydrogen ions. As a result of this, one bicarbonate enters the cell by this reaction with carbonic anhydrase type 4. This hydrogen excreted reacts with the bicarbonate, and that bicarbonate is split into water and carbon dioxide, which easily enters the cell, and thus bicarbonate is absorbed into the proximal tube, and ultimately it is secreted into the blood. So for each hydrogen ion secreted outside, one sodium and one bicarbonate enters the interstitial fluid. Thereby the proximal tubule cell maintains its concentration gradient. So this is one clever mechanism, because the negative ions, one positive ion is sent into the lumen and one negative ion is sent into the blood, thereby proximal tubule is maintaining. Thus they move in the opposite direction and contribute for the balance of acidosis. This is a table, picture showing the amount of reabsorption of bicarbonate in various sites. So maximum reabsorption occurs in the proximal tubule. That's why during the treatment of RTA, proximal RTA requires more bicarbonate correction. Even though the blood value of bicarbonate is much lower in the distal RTA, it is the proximal RTA which requires more correction during treatment. In distal RTA, the process of this buffering is little different, because here it is an active process where the potassium, where the hydrogen ATPase with the active mechanism pushes the hydrogen out of the cell. This is the main mechanism. But in proximal RTA, it is an exchanger which acts in response to the sodium potassium ATPase. Basically the defect in distal RTA is excretion of hydrogen ions, and the defect in proximal RTA is the absorption of bicarbonate ions. This is a table showing some features of differentiation. Mainly I was concentrating on the hypokalemic RTA, which is type 1 and type 2. In both, urinary pH will be high, but generally type 1 has higher urinary pH, and plasma bicarbonate will be generally very low in type 1 than in type 2. Distal RTA patients are also prone for nephrocalcinosis. The reason is probably because since in distal RTA the hydrogen excretion is grossly affected, and so to buffer the hydrogen in the blood, phosphate has to be released from the bone, and in addition to it, calcium also will be released, and this can also cause hypercalciuria and hyperphosphaturia. And also alkaline urine can cause low citrate levels in the urine. Citrate is generally protective for stones, because calcium and citrate will combine and thus prevent the precipitation. But in distal RTA, all these are affected and it can cause nephrocalcinosis. And last point is distal in proximal RTA there will be higher loss of bicarbonate, and so they require higher dose of bicarbonate. Generally proximal RTA patients require 10 milliequivalents per kg per day of bicarbonate, whereas distal RTA patients require about 1 milliequivalent per kg of bicarbonate per day, but we have to titrate it based on their clinical response. And also bicarbonate infusion therapy can worsen the hypokalemia, so both have to be corrected. So the take-home message is hypokalemia with metabolic acidosis has only few differential diagnoses, mainly renal tubular acidosis, diabetic ketoacidosis, and diarrhea, and all the surgical diversion procedures. And also next another point is based on therapy, proximal RTA patients require a higher dose of bicarbonate than distal RTA patients. Thank you.
Any questions or comments?